I work in the pro department of a home improvement company. I worked the closing shift with another cashier, who I'll call Aria. Aria's a really kind but quite timid cashier. She's also very pretty, so she has a lot of contractors hit on her. It's usually not that worrisome, though a few compliments, maybe a dinner invite, which she'd politely decline. I would probably ask her out as well if it wasn't for one detail: Aria does have a girlfriend. So being hit on by guys on a daily basis makes her rather uncomfortable. When we first met, I told her she ought to tell those guys about being gay, but she kept saying it wasn't any of their business, so she kept that part to herself. Aria has become my best friend, and having another cashier there with you keeps things from getting lonely. We even cover for each other's lunch breaks. One day, when I came back from lunch, Aria started telling me about this rather creepy guy who was flirting with her. She said she politely turned him down, saying she was with someone already, and while he didn't seem happy, he did leave. I shrugged it off as nothing more than the usual horny guy and laughed it off. But later that day, the man came back. Aria wasn't there, as she had left to help a customer find some lumber, so it was just me. He looked rather normal, probably handsome to most women, but he acted off. After looking around the area, I asked him if I could help him with anything. "I'm here to see Aria," he told me. I asked him how he knew her, and he said he had come in earlier and asked her out, to which she said yes, so he had come back in to pick her up. I told him she had left for the day, a usual lie everyone tells to cover for their friends. His smile went away as he started looking annoyed. He said he wanted to speak to Aria and ask her out again, which contradicted what he had just told me about accepting his previous invite. I told him he could not do that, which caused him to cross his arms and asked me why not. I'm not the best liar when it comes to making up excuses on the spot. However, I didn't want to tell him Aria was gay if she didn't want him to know it. So I just blurted out that Aria was my fiancée. His annoyed look went to confusion as he asked me how someone as pretty as she is could go out with someone like me. I'm not a Chris Evans or anything, but I don't think I'm that bad looking. I told him it didn't matter and that she and I were getting married in a couple of months, so he needed to back off. He gave me a death look but didn't say anything. After an awkward silence, he left. After Aria had gotten back, I told her what went down. She asked me to describe him, and after I told her what he looked like, she said that was the same guy who came in before. She was a bit creeped out by what went down but found the fiancé excuse rather funny. She even stated she'd rather be engaged to me than go out with him, which I'm guessing was a compliment. A couple of weeks went by, and we had all but forgotten about the man. At this point, one night after it had gotten dark, Aria and I were getting the trash together so we could close down the registers and go home. Just then, we heard a bang at the door, causing both of us to nearly jump out of our skins. It was the guy again. He had a wild look in his eyes as he kept his face pressed against the glass. "We're closed," I told him, but he insisted he needed to come in. Aria yelled again to tell him she's not interested and for him to go away and leave her alone. But he yelled that he's not here for her, he's here for me. He then says that if he can take out her husband, then she'd be all his. Based on that, he wanted to kill me. I told Aria to run to the manager's office and call the police, and I'd stay here and watch him. I won't lie though, I was pretty afraid to be in that tiny little area. If the guy was able to get in, he wasn't the biggest guy, but he could have had a weapon on him. Plus, the store doesn't allow us to have self-defense items on us, so I was on my own here. The guy then started ramming the sliding doors like he was crazy. The doors were rattling. I could have sworn they were going to come off their base. Just then, Arya came running back around the corner with a 2x4 in her hand, yelling that the cops were on their way. Finally, the man decided to leave. The closing manager met the officers when they came, and he took them to review the cameras. Thankfully, the man was caught and arrested, but Arya and I felt unsafe working there any longer. We're still friends and even attend the same college together, but we have separate jobs now while we pay our way through classes. I'm glad she was there to help me with the rogue man, as I hate to imagine what he might have done to me, or worse, what he might have done to her. She says she's glad I was there for her as well, as having a guy around tends to make men like him less confident in what they might try. It was a wake-up call for me as to how dangerous it can be for some girls when an interested guy just doesn't want to take no for an answer. During the summer last year, I chose not to take any classes and got a job at a gas station right next to my college campus. I was sort of disillusioned with school and wanted to make some money while I had time off. The gas station was one of the first places I tried applying to, and it turned out to be the last when they hired me on the spot. I thought it was a little weird, but I didn't question it. Unfortunately, they said they only wanted me for the night shift, which was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I knew it would wreak havoc on my already messed up sleep schedule, but I decided to go for it and just see how it went. To my surprise, most of the time it wasn't that bad. The first few hours of the shift were pretty busy, and it would get crazy, but then it would always get really slow until about 5 o'clock in the morning. This gave me plenty of time to clean, stock the shelves, and chill out until the morning rush. Occasionally, somebody suspicious or problematic would wander in, but I never had anything get too out of hand. Well, that was of course until something did happen. It was a Thursday, which wasn't usually a busy night. I had a coworker until about midnight, then they went home, and I was left alone. Time went by pretty fast, and before I knew it, it was almost 2 a.m. That's around the time a man walked in, and I immediately had a bad feeling about him. He had a shaved head and a bunch of tattoos of weird symbols, so I was pretty sure he was a skinhead. I noticed he had parked his dirty old lifted pickup truck in the handicap spot too, but I didn't want to get on his case about it. It was 1:58 when he walked in, and he spent a few minutes wandering around the store. In the end, though, all he bought was a case of beer. However, by then it was 2:01. My county has a law that says alcohol can't be purchased between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. I told the man that, as politely and apologetically as I could, that he couldn't buy the beer. He immediately became agitated and went off on a rant about how it was a free country and that it was a stupid law. I tried my best to reason with him, and I said that I was just trying to do my job. But this only made him start to criticize me like I was some kind of spineless pawn for my boss. That's when I asked him to leave if he was going to be that way. Then he suddenly changed his tone again, acting all chummy and saying it wasn't a big deal and that I should bend the rules for just a few minutes since it was before 2 o'clock when he walked in. He kind of made a good point, so I eventually caved just so he would get out. I sold him the case of beer, and then, of course, he asked for a pack of cigarettes to go with it. I let him have it as there was no rule against tobacco sales. He smiled at me and then left the store. I breathed a sigh of relief, but that relief was short-lived. I thought he would get in his truck and leave, but instead, he opened the tailgate and sat down on the truck bed. He cracked open a can of beer and started drinking it. Now I had a feeling that this was far from over, and that was exactly the case. A few minutes later, another truck pulled up right next to his, and a couple of guys got out, both of them with shaved heads and tattoos. They stood around the back of the first guy's truck, just smoking and drinking. I knew I had to go out there and tell them that they couldn't loiter in front of the store and that it was illegal to drink out in the open like that, especially that close to a car. But I was a little scared already. They kept looking in the window at me, smirking as if they knew what I was thinking and were challenging me to try. Before I could find the courage, another car, this time an SUV, pulled in next to the two of them, and two more guys got out and joined the others. They were all part of the same skinhead group, without a doubt. My guess is they were coming from a bar that had just closed and didn't want to end the night yet. That was the most reasonable explanation, but my paranoid thoughts made me think they were about to get together and burn down the store because the owner's wife was Mexican. Then the first guy came back into the store. He was drunker than before and all smiles. But then he came back to the register with another case of beer. I was about to tell him he definitely couldn't buy it at that time, but before I could even open my mouth, he looked at me all smug and said he really wouldn't want to disappoint him and all of his friends. I took that as a pretty solid threat, so I let him do what he wanted. My hands were shaking, and I was dreading having to count change in front of him. But then he told me to keep the change, like he was giving me some kind of big tip. He walked back outside, and all the skinheads cheered at the fresh case of beer. Apparently, they had worked together and finished all 24 cans of the previous one. I then realized they had been tossing the empty cans all over the ground and kicking them around. It felt like I was completely stuck with these pricks, and I knew I would either get in trouble over it or get literally ganged up on and have any manner of horrible things done to me just for saying no to them. What normal person would see a bunch of drunk skinheads smoking cheap cigarettes on top of their pickup trucks in front of a store in the middle of the night and still want to walk past them to get in? Pretty much nobody, not a single person, except more of the skinheads. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked up and locked the door so they couldn't get back in. Then I walked back to the office and called the police. Several minutes later, a cruiser showed up and told them to screw off. There was some shouting outside that I couldn't quite make out, but I was worried for a few minutes that things would escalate. Thankfully, they left without causing too much of a scene, but I have no idea how close it got. The cop waited for them to leave before doing so himself. Right before he got on his way, I came out and asked him to stay a while I cleaned up their mess. The next day, I unfortunately had to quit that job. There was nothing more terrifying to me than the thought of being stuck behind that register if those guys ever decided to come back. Still, I kind of get worried that one of them will see me around town and recognize me. I don't know what those people are all capable of. All I know is my town is full of dudes like that, and they're always causing problems. Up until about a year ago, I worked at a grocery chain. I was, and still am, a working college student. My availability was only 6 p.m. to closing, which in this case was midnight. It wasn't my favorite job. I dealt with a lot of annoying customers and coworkers, one of whom once broke into my locker and put a used tampon in the pocket of my apron, but that's a whole different story. My job was walking distance from where I lived, which made it really convenient since I didn't have a car. One Friday night, I was closing as usual with my supervisor, and we were running later than we usually did. My supervisor and I finally got the remaining customers out of the store, clocked out, and left. I left before my supervisor and began walking home. After a long, frustrating day of annoying customers, it felt great to just walk through the fresh winter air. I spent a few minutes shuffling through my phone's playlist to find a song to walk home to. I had made my way down the main road, careful not to slip on any of the ice. One thing that's really important to know about me is that I'm a very anxious person, and while it's definitely a problem most of the time, it does help make me constantly aware of my surroundings. That's when I saw an approaching car slowing down on the deserted main road, and I automatically went on high alert. It was a black car that came to a slow stop against the sidewalk I was on, about 10 feet behind me. I immediately clutched my phone in my hand and brought it out of my pocket. If there wasn't any ice covering the sidewalk and my feet didn't hurt, I probably would have run. Instead, I opted to try and pretend that I wasn't afraid, which I don't think worked because I picked up my pace after the car stopped. It was then that I heard a man's voice call out to me. "Hey, it's cold out here. You want a ride?" the man said. I kept walking away from him up the street, pretending I didn't hear him and just hoping he would go away. It didn't work. A few moments later, I heard the car tires crushing the ice on the road and then turned around to see what he was doing. He was now driving with the car in reverse. When he caught up to me, he had rolled down the passenger seat window some more. He was a black man, maybe in his mid to late 30s. He looked at me and I stopped, prompting him to stop his car as well. "Hey, let me give you a ride," he said through the car window. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to be polite because even though I was scared, I tried to be rational. All he did was offer a girl a ride home who was walking in the cold at night. Also, with the possibility of him being a kidnapper or a rapist, it was really best not to piss him off on the empty street. "No thank you," I said politely but firmly that I hesitated for a second. I was trying to figure out what to say that would get him to leave me alone away which street I lived on. "I'm okay," I insisted. "Thanks, though." As I finished thanking him, I started walking again, now putting both headphones in with the song paused. It was more of a way to signal that I was done talking to him. He didn't say anything, but I knew that he was watching me walk away. I felt relieved when I got a few more feet away from his car and heard the sound of his tires driving away. Unfortunately, the situation was only getting worse. As I started walking past the entrance of a car dealership, I saw the same car making a U-turn in the middle of the street out of the corner of my eye. When I turned slightly, he pulled up to the sidewalk yet again, this time a few feet in front of me. The man then opened the driver's seat door and got out of the car. It was at that point I was actually afraid I wouldn't make it home that night. He looked at me with this weird expression on his face. He had this really focused look while trying to look casual. It's really hard to describe. He started walking up to me. This kind of situation had never happened to me before, but I always thought of dangerous hypothetical situations in my head. I guess thinking about those situations prepared me to an extent because before I even realized it, my phone was already against my ear like I was on the phone with someone, even though I wasn't. When he came closer to me, he saw my phone in my hand and must have realized someone could know where I am right now, or I could be calling 911. That's the only explanation I can think of because when he looked at my phone, his demeanor totally changed. He stopped in his tracks with a worried look on his face and then asked me, "Oh, are you on the phone with someone right now?" I replied, looking at him with my phone still against my face and my other hand casually in my pocket. Without saying anything else, the man immediately turned around, got back in his car, and then started to drive up the street. I walked slowly at first, letting some distance grow between us, but as soon as I felt safer, I walked up the street as fast as I could without slipping. I frantically tried to call my dad, who I thought was home at the time. He didn't pick up. I then tried to call my sister and my fiancé. I didn't feel like I was in danger anymore, but my adrenaline was through the roof and I wanted to hear from someone who would make me feel better. I gave up calling after I couldn't get in touch with anyone and just kept walking. I was finally getting ready to turn onto another street when I passed an empty parking lot and saw the same man leaning against his car looking over at me. "Hey," was all he said in a flat tone when I walked by. At this point, I was completely freaked out. I didn't have my phone out anymore, so I couldn't pretend I was talking to someone again, and I was also significantly closer to my house. If he decided to get into his car and follow me, there wasn't any detour I could take to try and lose him. I was now on the verge of tears, and that's when I decided to call 911. I called 911 and told them the situation. The officer on the other line stayed on the phone with me until I got into my house. After that, an officer came to my house and asked me a bunch of questions about the man. He also asked me about his car and where I last saw him. All of the details were either too vague or I didn't remember. He said that he would at least patrol the area for him. I'm not really sure if he actually did or not, but it made me feel better at the time. From that point, I needed a ride to and from work every shift until I got my schedule changed to day shifts. Just a few weeks later, the college semester ended and I was planning on skipping a semester anyway. That experience only reinforced my decision. The more I think about that situation, the more I realize how lucky I was. I was in the perfect position to be taken, but I actually used some quick thinking that really de-escalated the situation. I moved in with my fiancée, and now I have a pocket knife and pepper spray for whenever I walk home at night from my new job. It's something to remember: if you haven't called 911, if you don't have anything to defend yourself against someone, either let someone know where you are or pretend that they know where you are. It can potentially save your life. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.